Next on Bill Moyers' Journal, Ron Paul.
In politics, it's usually the insurgent who carries the discontent of people who feel excluded from the mainstream. This campaign, Ron Paul is the insurgent. Congressman Ron Paul from Texas placed 5th in Iowa with 10% of the vote. But turn on your computer and you'll find him at the top of the world's most watched video posting site.
Congressman Paul, it's nice to meet
Hi.
you. My name is Steve Grove. I'm from over at YouTube, the News and Politics Editor over there.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, welcome. You have quite the following on YouTube. We're excited you could...
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. More subscribers than any other candidate on the platform.
Some 7 million viewers at last count have clicked on Ron Paul's YouTube offerings. More viewers than tuned in to the first 2 Republican debates on cable television. Whatever happens now, this libertarian Republican has become a phenomenon in his own right, taking on the powers that be in his party to argue against the war in Iraq, among other contrarian positions. He stopped in our studio en route from Iowa to New Hampshire. Congressman Paul, thanks for coming. You've got quite a following on the YouTube and on the internet generally. What's your explanation for that and the difference between that and what happens in the primary?
You know, every time I meet some of the young people who come, you know, and join the campaign, I ask them that question. The answers are generally very similar. And I've been very pleased and very surprised. A lot of them will just say, well, you're a strict constitutionalist. We like your respect for the Constitution. That's sort of very encouraging. And others will say, we like your respect for personal liberty, you know, and even monetary policy. I talk about monetary policy, and they're interested in that. And I think it's very important policy. So that excites me when I see young people responding to it. But I think they realize the financial condition of this country much better than those who work around Washington. They condition themselves to be convinced that there's no serious problem.
As you were coming in, I was reading another story on the internet about Fox News excluding you from the Republican debate this weekend in New Hampshire. What was the rationale they gave you?
They wouldn't give us one. We kept calling, and matter of fact, even a Fox affiliate in Houston came and interviewed me, and they were interested in the story. And they called, and they couldn't even get an answer. Of course, they were getting a lot of call from our supporters in Texas and wanting to know why he's excluded. But the affiliate wasn't even told why. They don't tell us what the criteria is, and so it's all speculation. But I think on the long run, they're going to be more embarrassed than I will be.
You are on the ABC debate this weekend, right?
That is right.
Because you met their benchmarks?
Well, evidently, but I didn't. They don't describe them. But I've been in all the debates so far, you know, and we've done rather well. You know, we always do real well in the post-debate polling,
right.
And even on Fox.
You and Dennis Kucinich usually are said to be the winners of those debates.
And yet some people, I guess, they don't want to hear our message.
How would you encourage more substantive discussion of ideas by people like you in the mass media that is primarily owned by 5 or 6 major companies in America today? Do you think that's a free market?
Well, not really, because the radio waves and the TV waves were never totally free. You know, they're allocated by the government, and then they're licensed by the government, and there's regulations there. So I see that less free. And I think you could make a case for what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but fortunately we have more competition today than ever before. That's what's exciting. All of a sudden, you know, I can get a message out on the internet. Right. And what I fear, and what I talk about a lot, is will the government come in and have regulations on what you can say on the internet, like they can have what you say, and you know, and maybe there's a narrow little group who gets to buy all these TV and radio stations and clear channels and things like that. So are they going to control it? So that's why I fear the regulation. I don't want the government in the business of regulating. I don't want them to regulate the internet, because we've become competitive, just like you've indicated a few minutes ago. We reach a lot of people. We haven't translated that into the conventional polls. We still have a challenge in this campaign, but there's still a wonderful opportunity with the free market in disseminating information.
But it isn't the government that is requiring Fox News to keep you off the airways. It's not the government making those decisions about who gets hurt or not. It is these companies with who own, as you say, a lot of the media outlets.
But I think it's still to the philosophy they believe in. They believe in war, and they believe in the military-industrial complex, and some of these companies are mixed in with making profits off war, so they're not going to have the same attitude about going to war as I might have. But I think that's still a reflection of their philosophy rather than the fact that they're a media company.
You remind me of something you told Tim Russert on Meet the Press. You talked about fascism. Look at this piece of tape.
We're not moving toward Hitler-type fascism, but we're moving toward a softer fascism. Loss of civil liberties, corporations running the show, big government in bed with big business. So you have the military-industrial complex, you have the medical-industrial complex, you have the financial industry, you have the communications industry. They go to Washington and spend hundreds of millions of dollars. That's where the control is. I call that a soft form of fascism, something that is very dangerous.
Do you think we're heading in
now we're living in an age today in this post-9/11 atmosphere where our civil liberties are being undermined constantly, all in the name of safety and security. We're supposed to give up our rights of our privacy. We are allowed now to accept the idea of secret prisons and secret renditions and the loss of habeas corpus. This is very, very dangerous, and I don't want to get to the point where it's hard to reverse. Matter of fact, right now it's getting more difficult every day to reverse this trend, because the American people seem to often say, you know, I can't be free if I'm not safe, so I want my government to make me safe, and they're willing to give up their liberties. And I'm convinced that you never have to give up liberties to be safe. I think you're less safe when you give up your liberties.
You know, as you speak, I'm curious about how you as a libertarian feel that the winner in Iowa and a possible leader of your party in the fall in the presidential election is a man who openly identifies himself, defines himself as, quote, a Christian leader. I'm speaking, of course, of Michael Huckabee, who, as you know, wears his religion on his sleeve, talks openly about it, doesn't proselytize politically for it, but he is a man who has identified himself as a Christian leader. Does that make you uncomfortable, given the fact that most libertarians I know are disturbed about any entanglement between the government and religion?
Well, it bothers me to a degree. I happen to be a believer. I'm a Christian, and I do write about it, but I specifically say I don't carry my religion on my sleeve. Sometimes I had been annoyed about the prayer breakfast in Washington. I never attended the prayer breakfast in Washington, although I am a believer. I just thought that was more publicity, and you know, the Bible does teach us that we should say our prayers in a closed room and not flaunt it, and not to pretend you're holier than others. So I've approached it that way, and I haven't accused anybody of doing that, but it is, when it's overly used, it does annoy me. I mean, the idea of a theocracy very much annoys me.
Do you see Michael Huckabee in that direction?
I don't. He hasn't said anything specifically that I would say we got to defeat Mike Huckabee because I think he's a theocrat. I haven't said that, but I think that there are a lot of people who may interpret it that way.
And are you nervous?
I'm nervous about the way our country is going because they don't understand the First Amendment, you know, because I'm a strong defender of the First Amendment, and that says the Congress shall write no laws, and that's what I think is the most important thing. I sometimes even worry about how they've, I don't like the idea that Mitt Romney might lose, you know, because of his religious beliefs. And if you understand the First Amendment, we shouldn't even be asking him what his religious belief is. So I'm sympathetic with that, and I don't like that, the way he's been treated, or at least subtly behind the scenes, and how people might react to that. Because with the First Amendment, it says we're not supposed to be dealing in that, and that shouldn't and never be a litmus test for being elected.
And the Constitution, and you believe in the Constitution, says that there can be no religious test for office, right? Doesn't some of the things that Mike Huckabee is saying get close to an implied religious test?
I think for some of the supporters might be doing that, and I think they have a right to know what your religion is, but that shouldn't be a test. And I think for some individuals it becomes a test, but I don't think we've quite gotten to the point where we have to make a public statement of what our religious beliefs are, or the rejection of our religious beliefs. I think the most important thing is to make sure they understand the First Amendment.